Have you ever witnessed a massive, undeniable giant fall to its knees, only to look around and realize with absolute horror that completely no one else was watching? Imagine a machine so profoundly legendary, so deeply and fundamentally baked into the very DNA of American infrastructure that its massive, square-jawed silhouette defined the absolute concept of raw, unadulterated mechanical power for an entire generation. We are talking about the undisputed heavy iron king of the classic highways, a mechanical leviathan forged from thick steel, polished aluminum, and a deafening earth-shaking roar. For decades, this specific breed of classic truck, the towering flat-nosed cabover and the long-hooded conventional beasts of the mid-20th century, was the untouchable titan of the asphalt. It did not just move freight from one coast to the other, it commanded the roads, shaking the very ground with a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that could be felt in your chest from miles away. It was a truck that demanded absolute, unwavering respect, driven by a rare breed of men who were half mechanic, half gladiator, and entirely fearless. But then, on one specific, strangely quiet day in history, this entire era of absolute mechanical supremacy simply stopped. It did not go out in a massive, glorious blaze of fire and twisted metal. It was not celebrated with a grand parade down Main Street, and it was not mourned by the millions of people who relied on it to put food on their tables. It simply died. But why? How does an absolute legend, a machine that conquered blinding blizzards, scaled impossible mountain passes without a single computer on board, and physically built the modern world, just vanish into the shadows without a single person noticing? The answer is a fascinating, heartbreaking collision of historical timing, ruthless mechanical evolution, and a world that was suddenly entirely too distracted by its own terrifying chaos to pay any attention to the tragic death of the ultimate classic truck. To truly understand the profound tragedy of this silent demise, we have to completely immerse ourselves in the violent, beautiful reality of what it actually meant to sit behind the wheel of this analog monster. To truly grasp what was permanently lost to history on that fateful day, you have to completely erase your modern understanding of what a commercial truck is. Today, the trucks rolling down the interstate are silent, hyper-aerodynamic, computer-controlled spaceships where a driver can practically fall asleep while the machine keeps itself in the lane. But the classic heavyweight of the mid-20th century was a terrifying, magnificent beast of pure, unregulated analog engineering. Picture a towering cabover design, a flat-nosed fortress of heavy-duty riveted aluminum sitting directly on top of a roaring, naturally aspirated, violently loud two-stroke diesel engine. When a driver climbed up those vertical, freezing metal steps and wrestled open the heavy steel door, he was not stepping into a comfortable, climate-controlled workspace. He was entering the claustrophobic belly of an industrial power plant. There were no microchips monitoring the fuel pressure. There were no automated transmissions that shifted with the push of a soft plastic button. There was only a massive, bone-shaking steering wheel the size of a manhole cover, a complex, physically demanding twin-stick transmission that required the driver to shift two separate heavy metal levers simultaneously just to change a single gear, and a vast dashboard completely covered in analog gauges that desperately monitored the boiling pressures of the volatile engine beneath the wooden floorboards. When you fired this machine up in the freezing cold of a winter morning, it did not hum. It violently exploded to life, belching thick, choking plumes of black smoke from towering dual-chrome exhaust stacks. The sound was absolutely deafening. A screaming, mechanical symphony of grinding cast-iron gears, whining massive turbochargers, and the furious, rapid-fire combustion of raw diesel fuel. Driving it was not a job. It was a grueling 12-hour physical combat against the machine itself. You felt every single microscopic imperfection in the road shooting directly up through the rigid leaf spring suspension and directly into your spine. You steered with the sheer strength of your shoulders. You shifted with the momentum of your entire upper body, and you listened to the health of the engine with your very soul. The men who drove these classic beasts formed an incredibly deep, almost spiritual symbiotic bond with them. They knew every rattle, every vibration, and every temperamental quirk. They genuinely believed these trucks were invincible, immortal titans of the highway that would rule the transportation industry forever. But what happens when an unstoppable, immortal machine suddenly runs directly into an invisible, impenetrable wall that it simply cannot smash through with brute force. If you're finding yourself captivated by the raw, unapologetic mechanical purity of this forgotten era, ask yourself this: how do you defeat an enemy that you cannot even see, touch, or outrun? For decades, the classic truck had easily conquered absolutely every physical obstacle the world had dared to throw at it. It had beaten the most catastrophic sub-zero winter blizzards of the Dakotas. It had hauled impossible, overloaded trailers over the steepest unpaved mountain passes of the treacherous Rockies, and it had survived the brutal, tire-melting heat of the Mojave Desert without a single cooling fan sensor. But the enemy that ultimately killed it was not physical. It was not a steeper mountain or a colder storm. It was a silent, creeping, bureaucratic shift in the very fabric of modern society. As the world forcefully pushed into a new complex era, the basic rules of the game began to change overnight. The government, suddenly terrified by a looming global energy crisis and a rapidly growing vocal awareness of environmental pollution, began to quietly draft a series of strict, suffocating, uncompromising regulations. They demanded unprecedented fuel efficiency, they demanded quiet highways, they demanded clean, heavily filtered emissions. But the classic truck was built for one thing and one thing only: raw, unapologetic, earth-moving power. It drank heavy diesel fuel by the gallon without a second thought, and it screamed with the terrifying voice of 1,000 angry pistons. The brilliant engineers who built them and the hardened, grease-stained drivers who operated them looked at these new government regulations and laughed out loud, genuinely thinking it was just a passing political fad constructed by men in suits who had never lifted a wrench. They believed with absolute certainty that when the heavy freight actually needed to be moved, when the country was truly desperate for vital supplies, the politicians would have absolutely no choice but to tear up their regulations and rely on the old, loud, dirty mechanical beasts to save the day. They completely, fatally underestimated how incredibly quickly the modern world was willing to abandon its hardest-working heroes for the sake of sanitized progress. The stage was perfectly set for a massive mechanical extinction, but nobody knew the exact day the heavy axe was actually going to fall. The true, lingering tragedy of this classic truck's death is not just the simple fact that it became obsolete, it is the absolute heartbreaking timing of exactly when and how it happened. Let us travel back to a very specific, terrifyingly chaotic moment in history. The exact day this legendary era of analog trucking was officially condemned to the scrapyard coincided perfectly with a day of unprecedented, overwhelming national distraction. The entire world was utterly consumed by a massive, historic oil embargo that had rapidly brought the global economy to its trembling knees. People were sitting in their freezing passenger cars in panic-induced lines that stretched for miles down suburban streets, physically fighting each other at the gas pumps with fists and weapons just to get a few precious gallons of rationed gasoline. The evening news stations were broadcasting absolute panic, 24 hours a day, warning of an impending apocalyptic economic collapse. Politicians were sweating and scrambling on live television. International tensions in the Middle East were boiling over into the very real threat of global war. And the average, hard-working citizen was completely terrified about how they were going to afford to heat their homes through the coming winter, or even drive to work the next morning. While the entire planet was staring in absolute horror at their TV screens and the flashing out of gas signs at the local stations, the final, fatal piece of environmental and efficiency legislation quietly passed through the heavily distracted, panicked halls of government. It was a sweeping, unceremonious mandate that instantly outlawed the production and commercial viability of the specific, unregulated mechanical two-stroke engines that powered these classic titans. It was an immediate, brutal, non-negotiable death sentence for the giants of the highway. But because the world was screaming at the top of its lungs about the oil crisis, because the newspaper headlines were entirely dominated by global panic and economic despair, not a single publication printed a story about the death of the classic truck. Not a single news anchor took 10 seconds to mention that the absolute kings of the American highway had just been legally assassinated by the stroke of a pen. The single most significant mechanical transition in the entire history of transportation happened in complete, absolute, deafening silence, entirely buried under a massive mountain of unrelated global chaos. Have you ever poured your entire soul, your blood, and your physical sweat into keeping something beautiful and powerful alive, only to slowly, painfully realize that you are the absolute last person on Earth who even remembers that it exists? Imagine the sheer, crushing psychological isolation of being a veteran driver on that exact world-changing day. You are sitting high up in the freezing cab of your classic mechanical monster, your calloused hands covered in thick black grease, your ears permanently ringing from the deafening, continuous roar of the two-stroke diesel engine violently vibrating beneath you. You have spent your entire adult life mastering this incredibly violent, difficult machine. You have sacrificed your hearing, your lower back, and your fleeting youth to keep this iron beast moving freight across the country. You pull into a massive, traditionally crowded truck stop, fully expecting to see the usual massive fleet of towering, chrome-covered classic cabovers dominating the lot and shaking the pavement. But as you look out through your vibrating, flat, split-glass windshield, you see a terrifying alien landscape that you do not recognize. The massive parking lot is slowly, steadily filling up with a completely new breed of truck. They are strange, highly aerodynamic sloping machines made of lightweight fiberglass. They are eerily, uncomfortably quiet. They do not aggressively shake the ground when they idle. They do not belch thick black smoke into the pristine sky. They are equipped with computerized fuel injection modules, fully synchronized transmissions that any amateur can shift with one hand, and plush, soundproofed interiors that feel like luxury sedans. You step out of your classic rig, the old air brakes hissing a final, tired, mechanical sigh, and you walk slowly into the diner. You look around the room, expecting the other drivers to be loudly boasting about the incredible horsepower of the old mechanical engines, but instead, they are quietly, clinically discussing fuel efficiency metrics, aerodynamic drag coefficients, and the new electronic logbooks. The entire vibrant culture, the fierce, unapologetic outlaw brotherhood that entirely defined your existence, has completely vanished overnight. You are a mechanical dinosaur standing in a world that has already aggressively moved on. And the most painful part of it all is that absolutely nobody is even looking at you. They are not mocking your classic truck. They are simply ignoring it entirely, treating the massive, roaring machine that literally built the country as an invisible, irrelevant, embarrassing ghost of the past. This agonizing reality brings us to the unceremonious, heartbreaking final run. Let me paint the precise, vivid picture of the exact moment this classic truck truly died. Not on a piece of legislative paper in a government building, but out there on the unforgiving asphalt. It is incredibly late at night on a desolate, crumbling stretch of the famous Route 66, a legendary highway that is also slowly dying, being aggressively bypassed by the massive, soulless, perfectly straight interstate highway system. The veteran driver is making one last, desperate haul in his classic, unregulated beast, hauling a heavy load of steel. The massive engine is screaming its familiar, deafening, beautiful song into the pitch-black desert night. For a brief, fleeting, perfect moment, everything feels exactly the way it used to feel in the golden years. The intense vibration in the steering wheel, the sharp smell of hot oil and diesel exhaust, the sheer undeniable momentum of 40 tons of rolling steel ripping through the darkness. The driver feels like an absolute king of the road again. But then, deep within the heavy heat-stressed iron block of the aging engine, a catastrophic, unrecoverable failure occurs. A massive internal component, fatally fatigued by decades of brutal, unforgiving abuse, finally shatters under the immense pressure. There is a violent, sickening shudder that rips violently through the entire cab, tossing the driver in his seat, followed by a terrifying, hollow, echoing metallic bang. The towering dual exhaust stacks spit a final, massive fireball of raw, unburnt fuel high into the night sky, illuminating the desert for a fraction of a second, and then absolute, horrifying, crushing silence. The massive steering wheel goes instantly dead heavy in the driver's hands, requiring all his strength just to keep it straight. The massive truck slowly, pathetically coasts to a halt on the sandy shoulder of the forgotten highway, the remaining momentum bleeding away into nothing. In the glorious past, if a classic truck broke down, another driver would be there within minutes, pulling over to help turn a wrench, share some oil, and get the beast roaring again. But tonight, the driver sits there in the silent, rapidly cooling cab, and he waits. He waits for hours in the dark. Modern, aerodynamic, silent trucks whisper past him on the new interstate a mile away in the distance, their drivers completely unaware of the massive mechanical tragedy sitting in the dark. No one stops, no one cares. The classic truck did not die in a fiery crash or a heroic final stand. It died of old age, of absolute mechanical exhaustion, sitting quietly on the side of a dead highway completely alone. What exactly happens to a massive, world-changing legend when there is absolutely no one left alive who cares enough to tell its story? If you're sitting there right now, watching this and feeling a deep, entirely unexpected sense of profound loss for a machine you may have never even seen in person or driven, I want you to truly, deeply consider the massive implications of this silent death. The quiet demise of this classic truck was not just the end of a specific vehicle model. It was the total eradication of a mindset, a beautiful philosophy of absolute resilience, self-reliance, and raw, unfiltered human physical effort. Today, we are completely hopelessly surrounded by advanced technology that intentionally isolates us from the physical world. Our vehicles practically drive themselves, our computers automatically correct our mistakes, and we are heavily insulated by soundproofing and climate control from the vibration, the noise, and the harsh reality of the outside environment. But the classic truck was the ultimate manifestation of physical reality. It fiercely demanded that you be mentally present, that you be physically strong, and that you deeply respect the sheer, terrifying power of mechanical physics. When that truck died on the wrong day, completely unnoticed by a panicked, distracted world, we permanently lost a crucial, irreplaceable piece of our own industrial soul. We happily traded the roaring, beautiful, demanding violence of the mechanical age for the sterile, silent, effortless convenience of the digital era. And while technological progress is absolutely necessary for our survival as a species, we have to stop and ask ourselves a terrifying question. In our desperate blind rush toward the future, how many incredible, legendary things are we simply leaving behind on the side of the road without even a second glance? The classic trucks are mostly completely gone now, reduced to rusty, hollow skeletons decaying in forgotten farm fields or polished into silent, non-running museum pieces that will never turn a tire in anger again. But their heavy ghosts still haunt the older, forgotten highways. If you roll your window down on a quiet desert night, far away from the glowing lights of the cities, you can almost hear the faint, echoing roar of a two-stroke diesel engine violently fighting its way up a steep mountain grade, refusing to be forgotten by history. Now, it is your turn to speak up and keep the history alive. I want you to look deep into your own memory, or ask your fathers and grandfathers about their history. Have you ever owned, driven, or even just stood next to a truly classic, purely mechanical machine that violently commanded your total respect just by turning it on? Was it an old, shaking truck, a vintage, unrestored muscle car, or a massive piece of analog farming equipment that physically shook the earth when it idled? Tell me your story down in the comments below. Right now, because I make it my absolute unwavering mission to read every single one of your experiences. We are the very last generation left with the power to keep the memory of these incredible mechanical giants alive before they are erased completely. If this incredibly deep, emotional dive into the heartbreaking, forgotten death of the ultimate classic truck opened your eyes to a massive piece of history that the entire world completely ignored, you absolutely must hit that like button right now. Hitting that like button is the crucial, necessary signal to the algorithm that these untold, legendary stories of raw mechanical history deserve to be pushed out and seen by millions of people. And if you're absolutely addicted to these deep, dramatic journeys into the hidden corners of human endurance, forgotten industrial history, and the beautiful, violent machines that actually built our world, you need to smash that subscribe button and turn on all notifications immediately so you never miss another intense historical upload. We are going to continue aggressively tearing back the curtain on the incredible stories that time and progress tried to erase forever. Keep respecting the heavy iron of the past, stay absolutely relentless in your own life, keep your eyes open to the history fading around you every single day, and I will see you in the very next video.